The wind was colder than it had been in years, or so it seemed to Sansa Stark as she stood at the great window in her private solar. The once formidable Red Keep, with its towers of red brick and its ancient halls of conspiracies and alliances, loomed around her in solemn silence. It had been only a few months since she had assumed the title of Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and yet it felt as though lifetimes had passed. Every decision she made, every fleeting moment of respite, carried a gravity she had never fully understood before. She had learned of responsibility as Lady of Winterfell, as regent in the north, and most painfully as a victim of other people's schemes and cruelty. But here, in King's Landing, she understood that responsibility could weigh as heavy as a chain of iron around her neck. If the burden was real, it was one she would bear, because only she knew how necessary it was for the realm to have a just and measured ruler. Sansa looked out across the sprawling city that had already begun to change in her short reign. Her presence alone, or so they said, had tempered the worst of the city's madness, the riots for bread, the uneasy tension between the inhabitants who had survived the War of the Five Kings, the Great War against the others, and the final chaos that ensued in the aftermath of Daenerys Targaryen's devastating arrival and eventual downfall. King's Landing had once known only terror in its final days beneath the wing beats of dragons. Thick black scars remained on the outer ramparts, a constant reminder of the fire that had raged during Daenerys' last stand and the wave of destruction that had nearly turned the capital to ash. She turned away from the window, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her slim fingers bore faint scars of their own, though they were not from dragon fire. Her scars were from being a pawn in the games of men. She had once been frightened and naive, forced to play a role in the events orchestrated by those far more cunning and ruthless than she had ever dreamed of being. Yet all of that was behind her now. Or perhaps it was never truly behind her. She carried each wound within her, each betrayal and each loss forged into the armor of the woman she had become. It was that armor, quiet, resolute, and unyielding, that now supported the crown resting upon her auburn hair. Not that the crown itself looked particularly splendid at the moment. Sansa often removed it as soon as decorum allowed. The metal felt cold and heavy, as though it had been steeped in the blood of the countless rulers who had worn it before her. Here in her solar, with only a few trusted guards outside the thick oaken doors, she allowed herself the luxury of discarding it upon a small table. It was a new design, one commissioned by those who supported her claim. Instead of the stag or the lion or the dragon, the shape was a gentle circlet of weirwood branches, silvered and polished until they caught the torchlight like hoarfrost in a wintry forest. At its center, a single garnet glowed red like a drop of blood. The diadem was said to represent the unity of the North with the South, an emblem that symbolized all of her journeys, from that once innocent girl in Winterfell to the cautious, watchful queen she was today. She would do better than the kings and queens before her, she had sworn it to herself. She would rule with the memory of her family at her side, her parents, lost to the cruelties of war, her brothers, scattered to different fates, and her sister, whose own path had been stained with blood and secrets. She would rule to protect the realm from tyrants who might someday rise, promising glory but delivering only ashes. She would never again kneel before a monster in human skin. That was her vow, as unshakable as the stone and ice of her homeland. It was not an easy thing to be queen. She had grown up amidst the illusions of the South, a world in which princesses were told they would marry knights who would love them. She had learned that illusions could be painful once they were stripped away. She had looked upon the severed head of her own father, heard the crows cawing in the emptiness of her shattered childhood. And through all of it, she had survived. That in itself she took as a testament to her worthiness to bear the new crown. A quiet knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. She lifted her head and raised a single hand, a gesture that silently bade the knocker to enter. One of her ladies stepped in, Anya Fossaway, a mild-mannered girl of around 16 with wide brown eyes. The lines of tension around Anya's mouth suggested she carried news or an urgent matter. Sansa offered a gentle nod and listened attentively. "Your Grace," Anya murmured, bowing her head. Though the realm was slowly adjusting to a queen in King's Landing, Sansa herself still felt a faint dissonance whenever people addressed her as Your Grace. "The Master of Coin wishes to speak with you about the new levy we're imposing upon the shipping lanes. He says it's a matter that cannot be delayed. Shall I have him wait in the throne room, or?" Sansa shook her head. "I'll see him here, in private. Give me a moment." Anya curtsied and slipped out as quietly as she had come. Sansa drew a slow breath. The Master of Coin was a newly appointed official, Ser Harry's Swift, a cousin to the previous Lannister allies, but so distant that he bore no illusions of having any meaningful claim to real power. He was an able steward but insisted on trifling matters with unrelenting zeal. Sansa appreciated his diligence, but she sometimes wished he would handle smaller issues on his own and not insist she personally weigh in on each and every concern. Still, she did not resent him for it. Better a master of coin who was honest and detail-oriented than one with hidden agendas and shallow loyalties. She picked up her crown from the table, feeling its cold metal press into her palms. She set it atop her hair and squared her shoulders. What a performance it was to be the queen. It was far different from being Lady of Winterfell, surrounded by her own people who had been loyal to her family for generations. In King's Landing, loyalty was a currency more fragile than gold. She had learned that the hard way, but she would endure. For she was a Stark of Winterfell, and if there was one quality that had seen her through a lifetime of trials, it was endurance. When Ser Harry's entered with a bow, shuffling documents tucked under his arm, Sansa took her seat at the small table and motioned for him to begin. His words tumbled out in a flurry of numbers, shipping routes, and negotiations with the ports in Dorne. She listened carefully, providing calm, measured answers when needed, letting him handle the specifics unless a question of justice or strategy arose. Once such tasks would have bored her, but she saw the necessity now. Once she might have only half listened, trusting others to see to the details while she dreamed of courtly love and feasts. That naive girl was gone. She had awakened from that dream long ago. She paused him only once at a mention of a crippling tariff on certain grain shipments that came up from the Reach. "We cannot impose an additional levy on grain," she said firmly, resting her hands on the table. "Those shipments feed half the city. I won't have the small folk starve because we wish to line the treasury. Find another way to bring in coin. Perhaps we can impose a new tax on luxury goods or on the shipping of foreign merchants who do not reside within the realm. But I will not allow the cost of essential goods to rise further for the people." "But, Your Grace," Ser Harry said nervously, "the treasury has still not recovered from the war. We need to rebuild the walls and pay back the Iron Bank's debts. These are not small sums." She fixed him with a calm, resolute gaze, one that brooked no argument. "I understand that, Ser Harry's, but I won't do it at the expense of those who already struggle to keep food on their tables. The cost of living has soared enough after the last war. The people need to see that this crown is different from those who have exploited them in the past. Do you understand?" It was not a question, but he nodded as though it were. "Of course, Your Grace. I will find another way." He left soon after, his arms filled with the same sheaf of parchments. Sansa watched him go and felt a strange mix of satisfaction and weariness. Sometimes making the right decisions felt like walking a wire stretched above an endless abyss. One misstep and everything could tumble into chaos. She was already contending with half a dozen lords who believed they had stronger claims to the throne than she. And while she had the support of many, there were always those scheming in the shadows, waiting for a sign of weakness. Yet she could not compromise her principles, not after all she had endured. When her solar was quiet once more, Sansa rose and decided she had spent too many hours cooped up. She summoned a pair of guards, Willem and Dacey, and decided to take a walk through the corridors of the Red Keep. She had no intention of venturing into the city that evening. That would be scheduled, not spontaneous. But a walk indoors might steady her mind. The corridors of the Red Keep were grand in scale, designed to make those who walked them feel small by comparison. The walls were decorated with tapestries from bygone ages, scenes of legendary battles, hunts, and victories. Under King Joffrey's reign, many had been torn down or destroyed, replaced by images that flattered him. Now, under Queen Sansa Stark, the corridors were slowly being restored to some semblance of respect for history. She had no wish to erase the past, even the ugly parts. That was where so many had erred, and that was how illusions grew until they swallowed truth entire. She wanted truth, no matter how harsh. She passed a few servants, all of whom bowed quickly as she approached. She offered them a gentle smile in return, though it was tinged with sorrow. She recognized that haunted look in their eyes. So many in King's Landing had seen horrors in the wars. Yet they kept going, as did she. She turned a corner, heading toward the Royal Library, a chamber that had miraculously survived many attacks over the centuries. Someone had once told her that knowledge was a king's and now a queen's strongest weapon. She wanted to see what new volumes the scribes and historians had recorded about recent events. Before she reached the library door, however, she was intercepted by Brienne of Tarth, who had become Lord Commander of the Queen's Guard. Brienne's imposing figure, draped in white cloak and armor, brought a surge of warmth to Sansa's chest. Of all the knights in her Queen's Guard, there was none more loyal, none more deserving of respect than Ser Brienne. She had proven her honor time and again, from the snows of Winterfell to the gates of King's Landing, from the halls of Harrenhal to the dreaded ruin of the Long Night. When Brienne knelt or bowed, it never felt like a show of false deference, it felt like a solemn vow renewed. "Your Grace," Brienne said as she dipped her head. "Pardon the interruption, but there is news from the north. A raven arrived not half an hour ago." Sansa's heart quickened. News from Winterfell always felt like a pulse from the home she would always love most. "Tell me," she said quietly. Brienne glanced around, noting the presence of a few passing guards and servants. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "It's about the unrest near the last hearth. Wildlings crossing the Gift, disputes about land. The new Lord Commander on the Wall has asked if you can send an emissary or direct orders to quell the tension. He says if it escalates further, some of the northern lords might take matters into their own hands." A quiet sigh escaped Sansa's lips. The North had declared her as their queen in the aftermath of the wars, but in accepting the Iron Throne, she had integrated her beloved homeland back into the Seven Kingdoms, albeit with certain concessions ensuring northern autonomy. She had not taken that decision lightly. She remembered the feeling of relief the North had when it was finally free from southern rule. Yet, ironically, here she stood, the product of both worlds, her father's daughter, a northern wolf, yet now the occupant of the southern seat of power. It was a fine line to walk. "I will dispatch an emissary," Sansa said. "But I also want a letter drafted in my own hand, reminding the northern lords of their obligations to keep the peace. The wildlings are no longer their enemies. They fought beside us, or have we forgotten the Great War so easily? Ask Maester Corrin to bring me parchment and ink." "I'll write tonight." Brienne nodded. There was an unspoken sympathy in her gaze, as if she understood the burden Sansa felt. "Yes, Your Grace. I shall see to it." The library would have to wait. She followed Brienne back through the winding halls, each step echoing the reality that she was no longer just Lady Sansa, no longer simply a small piece on the board. She was the one making moves, forging alliances, and shaping destinies for better or for worse. She only prayed to the old gods that her choices would bring about a kinder future than the one she had known. In the privacy of her study, she carefully wrote her letter, making sure to choose every word as though it were a sword thrust in a duel. A queen's words could wound or heal with equal force. She began by addressing the northern lords with respect. "My friends and allies," she wrote, "the land we share has bled enough these past years." She reminded them of how the wildlings had fought side by side with the men of the north against the whites that threatened all living beings. If peace was not fostered now, then all they had suffered would be for naught. As she wrote, she felt echoes of her father's spirit guiding her hand. Eddard Stark had believed in honor above all, believed in doing what was right, no matter the consequence. Sometimes she wondered if her father's moral code had set him on a doomed path. But she also knew that the path of dishonor would lead to another cycle of cruelty and war. If ever she doubted her father's way, she reminded herself of those who had lived by deceit and violence. They had all eventually met grim ends. When the letter was sealed with her signet, her personal crest combining the dire wolf with a new stylized flourish, she handed it to Maester Corrin, who promised to send it that very hour. She dismissed her servants and guards, then sank back in her chair, exhaling slowly. It never seemed to end, the calls on her time, the demands, the crises. But she had chosen this, and she would see it through. In the hush of that moment, she allowed herself a single quiet lament, the softest whisper of grief for the girl she once was. Then she steadied herself. There was no place for that girl in these halls. Her next appointment beckoned, a meeting with Lord Royce, who was representing the Vale's interests in court, and Lord Gendry Baratheon, the newly minted Lord of Storm's End. They were bringing proposals for rebuilding roads between the Vale and the Stormlands, ensuring easier trade routes and forging alliances. Sansa steeled her mind once more and walked into the small council chamber. She found them already in discussion. Lord Royce, older and gruff, sporting a close-cropped beard flecked with silver, spoke first. "Your Grace, I was just informing Lord Baratheon here that the passes between the Vale and the Stormlands remain treacherous. It would require a large force of engineers and laborers to carve safe roads through the Mountains of the Moon and then the Red Mountains bordering Dorne. We do not have the coin to fund such an endeavor alone." Gendry, broad-shouldered and earnest, nodded. "And my region is still recovering from the wars. We have wealth in the Stormlands, but not enough to finance a massive project with no immediate return. We're willing to contribute men and a portion of resources, but we'd need something in exchange." He paused, glancing at Sansa with a look that was half respectful, half uncertain. He had once bent the knee to her in a sense, after the chaos that followed Daenerys' demise. But Sansa felt a kinship with him, both of them shaped by circumstances they never asked for. Sansa took her seat at the head of the table, brushing her skirts aside. "We need to think of the good of the realm," she said quietly. "A reliable trade route between the Vale and the Stormlands would benefit us all. It would let us move supplies efficiently, strengthen alliances, and ensure none of us remain too isolated. Let's discuss potential ways to share the cost." For the next hour, the three of them pored over ledgers, trade agreements, and proposals. Sansa listened more than she spoke, gleaning insight into each lord's priorities. Royce valued the security of the Vale, Gendry valued the prosperity of his people in the Stormlands. Sansa valued the stability of the entire kingdom. A compromise emerged. The crown would sponsor a portion of the costs, paying for engineers and initial labor. The Vale would open additional quarries for stone, paying their workers with raw materials. The Stormlands would provide lumber from their forests. They would also set a modest toll for merchants using the roads, with a portion going to the crown until the costs were recouped. It was a carefully balanced agreement, not perfect for anyone, but acceptable to all. As the meeting concluded, Lord Royce bowed stiffly. "Your Grace, once the documents are drawn and sealed, we shall begin." Gendry followed suit, though his manner was less formal, more like the respectful nod of a blacksmith acknowledging his queen. "Thank you, Your Grace. I didn't think we'd sort it out so quickly." "You can both thank each other," Sansa replied, standing. "It was your cooperation that made it possible. I merely guided the discussion." They left her then, each with tasks to carry out, each a piece of the puzzle that would become a stronger Seven Kingdoms if all went well. Sansa knew that no one solution would please every lord. She knew that forces of discontent still brewed in corners of the realm, men who believed a woman was unfit to wear the crown, or men who simply lusted for the power of the Iron Throne themselves. But she would continue onward, dealing with them one by one, forging alliances as carefully as she had once sewn delicate stitches on her embroidery. Once, that was all she had known, stitching, singing, dancing. Now, her needle was her wit, her voice, her unwavering resolve. The day wore on, and Sansa found herself summoned to yet another concern. The Dornish envoy had arrived, bringing gifts and invitations. Though Dornish politics had always been prickly at best with the rest of the realm, Sansa knew how vital their alliance was. Dorne stood apart, proud and often resistant. But with the right approach, their loyalty could be won. As she gazed upon the fine silks and rare spices the envoy presented, she recalled the lessons Peter Baelish had once taught her. Knowledge of others was power. But she would not use that knowledge for treachery. She'd use it to prevent betrayal, to build something lasting. So she welcomed the envoy graciously, promised to consider his liege's proposals, and ensured he left the castle feeling optimistic about the new regime. The old Targaryen kings had tried to conquer Dorne by force. She would conquer them, in a sense, with mutual respect and carefully woven friendships. When she finally saw the envoy depart, she felt the subtle satisfaction of having guided one more step toward unity. Night fell, and the Red Keep transformed under flickering torchlight. Shadows danced along the corridors, and the moon hung high above the city's burnt spires. Sansa took a quiet supper, some bread, a bowl of broth, and a glass of watered wine. While reviewing letters and maps, she allowed herself only a few moments of small pleasure. She bit into a fresh apple from the reach and closed her eyes, savoring its sweetness. For an instant, she remembered a simpler time. Apples in the orchard at Winterfell, her sister's laughter echoing in the courtyard, her father watching with fondness. Then reality rushed back, and she turned another page of the war ledger. She had barely finished her supper when a messenger came with urgent tidings. A minor riot had broken out in Flea Bottom. Supposedly, some men from the Gold Cloaks had taken to beating suspected thieves, and in retaliation, the small folk had risen up, brandishing knives and clubs. Already a few had been wounded. The captain of the Gold Cloaks was asking for direction. Sansa closed her eyes briefly. This city was always on the brink of chaos. "Fetch Brienne," she told the messenger, "and a detail of guards. We will go ourselves." The messenger blinked, clearly startled. "Why, Your Grace, is that wise? Flea Bottom can be dangerous after dark." She stood, smoothing her cloak. "I won't rule from a distance, cowering behind the Red Keep's walls. If my people are in danger, I'll see it myself. Now do as I say." Brienne appeared moments later, her brow furrowed in concern. "Your Grace, at least allow me to go in your stead. If something were to happen." Sansa laid a hand on Brienne's plated forearm. "I understand your concern, my friend. But it's important I'm seen. They must know I am not like those who ruled before. This is how we begin building trust." Brienne said nothing, but her eyes burned with determination. She nodded, accepting her queen's decision, and took the lead. They descended the keep steps and summoned a small escort of the Queen's Guard and a few watchful archers. They carried torches that flickered gold and orange against the dark sky, descending into the cramped, crooked streets of Flea Bottom. The stench of waste and decay assaulted them even at the outskirts. Sansa steeled herself, remembering how once she had gazed out of the castle windows, ignorant of the suffering in these slums. At the heart of the commotion, a ring of gold cloaks were indeed surrounding a ragged group of small folk armed with crude weapons. Broken chair legs, rusted knives, a scattering of stones. One man lay bleeding on the ground, moaning softly as the gold cloaks spat curses and threatened the rest to stand down. Fear and anger mingled in the air like a poisonous fume. Sansa, with Brienne at her side, strode forward. "Enough!" Sansa called, her voice carrying authority. The gold cloaks and the small folk alike turned to stare. The torchlight revealed her face. Pale, resolute, crowned with the presence of the monarchy, if not the actual metal band she had left behind. Even here, in the filth and gloom, the hush of that single word was enough to bring a momentary ceasefire. "Stay back," shouted one of the small folk, a woman with tangled hair and frantic eyes. "We won't let them kill us." Brienne raised her sword in a non-threatening gesture, pointing the tip toward the ground. "Lower your weapons," she said, voice calm but firm. The gold cloaks who recognized Brienne began stepping aside, confusion etched on their faces. "Your Grace," one of them said, bowing hastily. "These thieves were found stealing bread, and then they attacked us. We were only ill." Sansa surveyed the scene. "That man on the ground, is he a thief?" she asked in a low, measured tone. A younger gold cloak shrugged. "He admitted to stealing from the baker's stall. We were about to arrest him." Sansa stepped closer, ignoring the grime beneath her slippers. The wounded man clutched his side, blood-staining his tattered shirt. He looked up at her with eyes filled with terror and hopelessness. She knelt, heedless of her cloak trailing in the dirt, and saw that his wound was deep. "What is your name?" she asked softly. "Arraf," he stammered. "Raf," she repeated. "And why did you steal bread?" He coughed, wincing from the pain. "I've got 3 children in an alley off the street of Flower. We ain't eaten in 2 days." Sansa closed her eyes briefly. The city was in a fragile state, but if the people starved, no measure of enforcement would quell the unrest. She turned to the gold cloaks. "Is your solution to beat him to death in the street? Have we sunk so low?" One guard reddened in the face. We follow orders, Your Grace. We didn't mean to, eh?" "I believe you didn't mean for matters to escalate," she said, voice tight with restrained anger. "But do not forget, your role is to keep the peace, not sow fear. Take him to a maester to tend his wound. Then we'll see about his punishment." She paused, glancing back down at Raf. "Stealing is still a crime, but so is letting children starve in the shadows of our city walls. I'll not see your children suffer. They will be fed. You will have to judge once you're healed." She rose, turning to the cluster of small folk still clutching their makeshift weapons. "And the rest of you return to your homes. There will be bread distributed in the morning at the main square. Tell your neighbors and come in peace. If you attempt violence, you only harm your own cause." Slowly, uncertainly, the small folk lowered their weapons. Their eyes gleamed with a mixture of gratitude and distrust. They had seen too many broken promises, too many lords and ladies who claimed to care but never showed their faces in the gutters. Sansa knew winning their trust would take time, not just words. As the tension eased, Brienne coordinated with the gold cloaks, ensuring the wounded man was carried off to a nearby maester. Sansa glanced around, taking in the bleakness of Flea Bottom. Crumbling hovels, muddy alleyways, hungry children peering from doorways. The stench of uncollected refuse filled the heavy night air. How could these people ever feel loyalty toward a crown that had done nothing for them? In that moment, she felt an ache in her chest, a kinship to the city's downtrodden. She had been powerless once, too, threatened by those who saw her as expendable. She remembered the fear, the desperation. She would not let her people feel that beneath her reign. A quiet determination filled her. She would implement reforms, bread distribution, jobs for rebuilding something. It would not solve everything, but it would be a start. If she failed, she would at least fail trying to help them, not ignoring them. As she turned to leave, a small girl slipped out from behind a broken cart. Her face was streaked with dirt, her eyes wide. She was perhaps 6 or 7, so thin that Sansa's heart clenched. Wordlessly, the child extended a tiny hand as if asking for help. Sansa knelt again, her own voice hushed. "What is it, child?" A moment passed before the girl whispered, "Is there really bread tomorrow?" Sansa reached out and gently brushed a lock of hair from the girl's face. "Yes," she said softly. "There will be bread." The little girl's eyes shone as she nodded and darted away, disappearing into the maze of Flea Bottom's alleys. Sansa watched her go, her throat tight. In that instant, she realized that in the eyes of that child, she was not just a queen, but perhaps the difference between hope and despair. She rose slowly, feeling the dust of the street settle on her cloak. Brienne appeared at her elbow. "We should return to the keep, Your Grace," Brienne said, her voice gentler than usual. Sansa nodded, casting one final glance at the squalor around her. "Yes," she said, "but we will come back." They walked back through the labyrinth of streets, the torches lighting their way. As they ascended the winding road that led to the castle gates, Sansa realized this was only the beginning. Being queen was not just about wearing a crown and sitting on a throne. It was about stepping into the darkness, braving the fear and the anger of those she ruled, and trying with all her strength to bring them something better than the cycle of violence they had always known. She had no illusions that it would be quick or easy, but she would not falter. She was a Stark, and Starks did not abandon their duty. When she at last crossed the threshold into the Red Keep, exhaustion weighed on her bones like lead. Yet, beneath the weariness, there was a flicker of purpose, a sense that she was forging her own path, not one dictated by lords or kings or illusions. She would never be the naive girl who believed in perfect stories again. But perhaps she could give her people a chance to hope in a better story, a story where mercy and justice coexisted, where winter did not last forever. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she was certain of that. She would face them as she had faced all the monsters and tyrants of her past, with quiet resolve, steady grace, and the unwavering certainty that she was, at long last, in control of her own destiny. Sansa slept fitfully that night, dreaming of ghostly figures roaming the corridors of Winterfell and King's Landing alike. She dreamt of her father, silent and solemn, and her mother, whispering words she couldn't quite hear. She dreamt of Arya, prowling through dark alleys on silent feet, and of Bran, distant as a memory. In the dream, the Iron Throne loomed before her, its twisted blades seeming to shift and move, whispering like 1,000 reptilian voices. She looked down and saw that the skirt of her gown was stained with soot and mud. The voice of Cersei Lannister floated somewhere on the edges of her consciousness, cold and mocking. Then the vision faded and she saw a lone wolf in a snow-covered forest, staring at her with golden eyes. When she woke, a hint of dawn light was pressing through the shutters and her skin was slick with sweat despite the coolness of the chamber. She rose, washing and dressing without calling for attendance. Her maids would likely still be asleep, and she preferred her own company this morning. She pulled on a simple gown of dark blue velvet, formal enough for courtly appearances, but not so resplendent that it felt like a costume. She let her hair fall in gentle waves down her back. Once, she had elaborately arranged it in the Southern style, trying to mimic Marjorie Tyrell or Cersei's artful braids. But she was no longer that girl. She wore her hair as she pleased, for her own comfort, not to appease the vanity of a court. Her first order of business was to fulfill the promise she made to Flea Bottom. She had already sent word to the kitchens, instructing them to bake additional loaves of coarse bread and to prepare cauldrons of thin porridge. It was not a feast, but it would keep hunger at bay for those who had none. She knew it was only a temporary measure. The real work lay in addressing the deeper causes of poverty: wages, housing, opportunities for labor. But for now, she wanted them to see she remembered them even in the earliest hours of morning. By the time she arrived at the courtyard where the bread distribution would take place, a line had already formed, ragged men and women with hollow cheeks, children clinging to their mothers' skirts. Guards kept a wary eye, but there was no sign of riot. Hope had replaced some of the desperation in their faces, if only fleetingly. Large barrels of porridge had been set over crackling fires, ladles and bowls ready. Sansa herself stepped forward to greet them. She asked each person their name if they dared to meet her gaze. Some mumbled that they were unworthy to speak to a queen, but she reassured them with a kindness that was genuine if tinged with sorrow. When the distribution began, she stood nearby, allowing the servants to do the physical work of handing out loaves. She wanted to observe to ensure no one was turned away unless there was simply nothing left. She would rather reduce the rations at her own table than send these people away hungry. As the line shuffled forward, she caught snatches of hushed conversation. Some recognized her from the night before, speaking of how she'd knelt beside the wounded thief as if he were not beneath her. Others recalled darker days under Joffrey's rule, or worse, the terror of Dragonfire under Daenerys. Sansa listened, her heart heavy with all that had befallen this city. She could not change the past, but she could shape the present. She made a mental note to speak to the Master of Whispers about any corruption in the distribution process. Some lords would try to hoard or sell these supplies. She would not allow that. She remained until the last loaf was handed out. Distant bells tolled, signaling the start of a new day's business in the markets. She nodded to her guards and made to depart, but paused at the sight of a small group of children huddled in an alley. They were older than the girl she had met last night, but just as thin, with the same watchful eyes. One of them dared to call out to her. "My queen," he said, stumbling over the title. "Is it true you're gonna fix the city?" She found herself walking over, pushing aside some straw and debris to approach them. "I'm going to try," she answered softly. "It won't be easy, but I will do my best. That's a promise." The boy stared at her for a moment, then lowered his gaze. "No one else tried before," he muttered. "They just burned things." Sansa felt a sting of guilt and anger at the memory of previous rulers. "I can't speak for them," she said, "but I promise you, as queen, I will do what I can." She reached out and touched his shoulder lightly. He stiffened but did not draw away. She offered him a faint smile, then signaled to her retinue that she was finished here. As she turned, she felt both the weight and the possibility of that pledge. She wanted these children to see something different, something worth believing in. Back within the Red Keep's walls, the day's official duties began in earnest. There were court petitions, lesser lords seeking judgment on land disputes, merchants requesting licenses, knights vying for positions in her guard. Sansa heard them all with measured patience. She made her rulings carefully, taking advice from her council where needed, but trusting her own instincts as well. Already, the rumors were swirling throughout the kingdom that the new queen was not to be trifled with, for she balanced mercy with a certain steel that came from having survived the cruelest fates. Some hours into the session, two lords entered side by side, both from the Westerlands. They claimed ownership of a valuable iron mine near the border of the Reach. Their argument had escalated into minor skirmishes between their banners, and at least 3 men had died. Now they sought the crown's arbitration. Sansa listened to their bickering. Lord Conklin insisted his ancestors had held the deed, while Lord Drax claimed to have married into a family that had once possessed it. They presented documents, half of them contradictory or incomplete. She sighed inwardly. Petty squabbles, but ones that cost lives. "Enough," she said quietly when the lords' voices rose over each other's. "Bring forth the records you have." She motioned for Maester Corrin to examine them. "And tell me, have either of you seen this mine? Do you have any written testimony from local villagers who might verify your claims?" They shifted uncomfortably, admitting they relied on old, possibly forged or incomplete charters. Sansa's face remained calm, but inside she lamented the realm's rampant disorder. "I will assign a royal envoy to travel to the site. They will inspect the mine, speak to those who live nearby, and return with a truthful account. Until then, neither of you may send armed men to the region. Is that understood?" Both lords glanced at each other, their pride stung, but their fear of displeasing the queen even stronger. They nodded. "Yes, your grace," Lord Conklin said. Lord Drax echoed him. Sansa gave a short nod. "Good. I will dispatch men I trust, and their word will be final." With that, she dismissed them. Such was the routine. She was forced to intervene in matters large and small, from bread riots to land disputes, from foreign diplomacy to petty feuds. Yet she recognized that every small decision was a thread in the tapestry she was weaving, a tapestry that would one day define the stability of her kingdom. That evening, she convened a meeting of her small council to discuss the state of the treasury and the immediate needs of the realm. Gathered around a table in a well-lit chamber were Ser Harry's Swift, the Master of Coin, Maester Corrin, the new Grand Maester, Lord Gendry Baratheon, who she sometimes invited for his practical knowledge of construction and forging, and Brienne, who stood guard by the door but was permitted to speak freely. Also in attendance was the Master of Laws, Ser Grance Gaunt, a stern man known for his strict interpretation of justice. Sansa began the meeting with a question. "Ser Harrys, have you found alternatives to the levy on grain? I trust you understand we cannot push our people further into hunger." He cleared his throat. "Yes, your grace. After some consideration, I propose we impose a small tax on harbor fees for foreign traders entering the Blackwater Bay. We could also reduce the tax privileges for the wealthier guilds within the city, ensuring those with greater means contribute more. But we must be cautious. The nobility will protest if we appear to target them disproportionately." Sansa folded her hands on the table. "The nobility will protest anything that touches their coffers. We should focus on fairness. The city has suffered enough, and those with means should help shoulder the cost of rebuilding. How soon can this be implemented? Sir Harry's glanced at a parchment. We could have the decree drafted within a fortnight. Enforcement might take another month as we reassign tax collectors and instruct the harbor officials. Sansa nodded. Very well, do it. We'll handle the fallout when it comes, and it will come, she added wryly. Lord Gendry cleared his throat. I wanted to speak about the roads we discussed. My men have already begun surveying the paths leading out of Storm's End. We can start building once the Crown funds and the Vale's materials arrive. I believe in a year's time we could have a working route through the mountains, if the weather cooperates. Sansa was glad to hear it. That's excellent news. Even a partial road would open trade and travel, and eventually it might bring new prosperity. Keep me updated. Ser Grants Gaunt, the Master of Laws, cleared his throat. Your Grace, there is also the matter of the city's internal order. The gold cloaks are stretched thin. Many of them are new recruits, poorly trained and with questionable loyalties. We've had increased reports of bribery and abuse of power. Sansa's lips pressed into a thin line. She recalled the scene in Flea Bottom all too vividly. Then we need to vet them more thoroughly. Those found abusing their station should be dismissed or punished, depending on the severity of their actions. We cannot allow corruption to fester within our city watch. Ser Grants inclined his head. Yes, Your Grace, but we must also address the recruitment issue. We need more men, and we need the coin to pay them properly. Otherwise, the Watch will always be prone to corruption. Before Sansa could respond, Ser Harry's interjected. Finding more coin is precisely our greatest challenge, Master of Laws. We can't just conjure funds out of thin air. Sansa cut in before they could begin a protracted debate. We will find a balance. But the Watch is a priority. If the city is not safe, none of our other plans can proceed smoothly. Brienne, can you and a few trusted knights oversee the training of the gold cloaks, at least for a short period? Your guidance might instill a sense of discipline. Brienne glanced at Sansa with a mixture of humility and pride. Yes, Your Grace, it would be my honor. Then see to it, Sansa said softly. Let's show them what a true knight's honor looks like. The meeting lasted another hour, covering topics ranging from the cost of dredging the Blackwater Rush to the scheduling of a tourney that some lords were proposing to celebrate the new reign. Sansa was lukewarm about the idea of a grand tournament. She knew people hungered for spectacle, but she worried about the message it would send to the impoverished, feasting on scraps while the nobles jousted. Perhaps a smaller affair, something modest to reassure the realm of its renewed stability. She told them she'd consider it, but made no promises. When she finally retired, her mind was a buzzing hive of concerns. She yearned for a moment of solitude, a moment to breathe air that wasn't thick with the demands of a kingdom. Dismissing her guards, she slipped onto a secluded balcony overlooking the Blackwater Bay. The moon had risen, a white crescent dipping into the dark horizon. The water shimmered like obsidian. Below, the city lanterns flickered, revealing the cramped sprawl of King's Landing. She let out a slow exhale, recalling how she'd once stood on a very different balcony, a frightened girl forced to watch her father's execution. She had felt so powerless, so alone. Now, she held power beyond what she'd ever imagined, yet she still felt alone in many ways. There was no one else who understood the weight of the crown quite as she did. Perhaps Tyrion Lannister had once grasped some of it, but he was gone, rumored to be traveling in the Free Cities or maybe even dead. Jon Snow, her brother or cousin, rather, had vanished into the far north, beyond even the Wall, searching for some semblance of peace with the free folk. Arya had sailed west, never to return, or so it seemed. Bran had remained distant, an otherworldly figure perched upon the seat of the North's knowledge, though not its rule. The rest of her family lay in the cold halls of memory. She drew her cloak tighter around herself, her breath catching in her throat. Sometimes, she wondered if her father would be proud of her, or if he would fear the compromises she might have to make. She wondered if her mother's fierce love would guide her decisions. In her darkest nights, she feared turning into another version of Cersei, calculating, isolated, paranoid. So far, She felt she remained on a better path, but the future was uncertain. After a long moment, she collected herself. Tomorrow would bring more duties, more challenges. She needed rest, and she had the discipline to force herself toward it. She slipped back inside, heading for her bedchamber. Sleep came more easily than the previous night, though she still dreamed of solemn faces in the north waiting for her to keep her promises. In the morning, a raven awaited her, this one from the citadel in Old Town, announcing that the conclave of maesters had recognized Maester Corrin's appointment as Grand Maester to the Queen. They offered respect and a subtle hint that they hoped for favorable treatment. She smiled ruefully at that. Even the citadel, bastion of knowledge, played its own political games. After breaking her fast with some boiled eggs and freshly baked bread, at least the kitchens in the Red Keep were well stocked, she thought grimly. Sansa set about drafting another letter. This time it was to the Lords of the Reach, thanking them for their continued shipments of grain and produce. She wanted to reassure them that she did not take their contributions lightly and that she would do her utmost to stabilize the realm so trade could flourish. She penned the words in her neat, flowing script, sealing them with her personal sigil. It was vital to maintain good relations with the Reach, the breadbasket of Westeros. As she was finishing, Brienne entered, announcing that a visitor from the north had arrived, a representative from House Manderly. Sansa's pulse quickened. The Manderlys had been staunch allies of the Starks, and Lord Wyman Manderly had been pivotal in the war against the Boltons. But Lord Wyman was gone, and now his son, Wylis, ruled White Harbor. Sansa wondered what message or news had prompted this visit. The visitor was Ser Marlon Manderly, a cousin to Lord Wylis, who carried himself with a hint of the Manderlys' famed pride. He bowed low. "Your Grace, it is an honor," he said in a deep, courteous voice. "I bring tidings from White Harbor as well as a personal message from Lord Wylis." Sansa invited him to sit and offered him a cup of spiced wine, which he accepted. She noted his well-trimmed beard and the slight paunch of his belly, classic Manderly traits, often accompanied by good humor and a love of feasts. But his expression was serious. She settled across from him, hands folded. "What news from White Harbor?" she asked. Ser Marlon took a measured sip of the wine. "We have been rebuilding our fleets and docks ever since the wars ended. Trade is picking up. We've even seen a few Braavosi galleys docking, though they bring rumors of unrest in Essos. Lord Wylis sends his congratulations on your coronation and pledges his ongoing loyalty, of course." Sansa inclined her head. "I'm glad to hear White Harbor prospers. The Manderlys have always stood by House Stark, and I have not forgotten." Ser Marlon looked momentarily pleased, then his face grew sober. "There is another matter. We have had trouble with raiders along the coast. Pirates, most likely, though some say they wear the banner of the Iron Islands. We're not certain if they're just rogues or if there is something more organized afoot. They prey on smaller fishing villages, taking what they can and vanishing back into the sea." Sansa's brow furrowed. "The Ironborn? Our treaties with the Iron Islands should hold." Yara Greyjoy vowed not to raid the north anymore. But there could always be splinter groups. Brienne, standing to the side, frowned. "We could send a raven to Pike, demanding an explanation." Sansa nodded. "We will. And we'll also see if any of our loyal lords with ships like the Manderlys can patrol the northern coasts. I'll dispatch royal vessels once we've refitted them. The Royal Navy is still in disrepair, but I'll make it a priority." She turned back to Ser Marlon. "Please inform Lord Wylis that his concerns are my concerns. We'll address these raids swiftly. In the meantime, be vigilant. If you capture any of these raiders, send word at once." Ser Marlon inclined his head. "Thank you, Your Grace. Lord Wylis will be heartened to hear it." He sipped his wine again, then continued. "He also sends a personal request. White Harbor hopes to host Your Grace someday to reaffirm the bond between Stark and Manderly in a northern setting. He believes it would strengthen the North's trust in your reign, especially since many in the North still feel wary of southern politics." Sansa allowed a thin smile. "I understand. I was born and raised in the North, but I know how they must see me now, a queen ruling from the South. I've not abandoned the North, though it might seem so. I would be glad to visit White Harbor when the time is right." Ser Marlon grinned broadly. "That will please Lord Wylis greatly. We will make sure the banquet is fit for a queen, I can promise you that." Sansa almost laughed at his enthusiasm. The Manderlys were known for their feasts, and she recalled some from her childhood, though that now felt like a lifetime ago. "I look forward to it," she said. "Until then, convey my warmest regards to your lord." With the business concluded, Ser Marlon took his leave. Sansa reflected on the news of the raiders. It was a new problem or perhaps an old one resurfacing. The realm was vast and pockets of turmoil could emerge anywhere. She decided to send word to Yara Greyjoy, a warning that if any Ironborn under her nominal command were raiding the north, they must be reined in or face consequences. As the day progressed, Sansa attended to a barrage of smaller matters, an appointment for a new royal gardener. The old one had perished during the siege when Daenerys's dragons burned the outer gardens, a complaint from a minor noble about highwaymen on the Gold Road, a request from the Faith of the Seven for funds to repair the ruins of the Great September. The latter gave her pause. She remembered the day the Great September had been destroyed. Cersei's wildfire claiming Marjorie, the High Sparrow, and so many others. The Faith still had influence in the city, but Sansa recalled how easily faith could be twisted into fanaticism. Nonetheless, she saw the importance of rebuilding religious structures if only to keep the population from unrest. She told the High Septon's representative that she would consider a modest contribution, but that the Faith must also gather donations from other lords. She had no intention of emptying the treasury for them alone. As she concluded her daily audiences, she stepped outside into the courtyard for a brief moment of fresh air. The day was bright, the sun bearing down on the stones with a fierce heat unusual for the early months of autumn. She spotted a gathering of knights practicing swordplay near the training yard. Ser Brienne was among them, towering over the rest as she demonstrated a series of defensive maneuvers. Nearby, Podrick Payne, now a capable warrior in his own right, observed with admiration. The clang of steel against steel reminded Sansa of her own vulnerabilities. She had never been a warrior in the physical sense. Her battles had been waged with words and cunning. Still, she felt safer knowing she had knights like Brienne who could protect her if the sword was ever needed. But Sansa didn't want to rely solely on the blade. She wanted a kingdom so stable that war became a distant memory, though she understood that, in Westeros, that was a lofty dream. A courier found her there, bowing hastily. "Your Grace, Lord Royce wishes to speak with you in the Solar. He says it concerns the progress with the Vale." She sighed lightly. "Another matter." She took one last glance at the knights sparring and noted the sweat glistening on Brienne's brow, the single-minded focus in her eyes as she parried. Then Sansa stepped away, heading to the Solar, the sound of steel echoing in her ears. Lord Royce was already seated in one of the tall chairs, his posture as rigid as ever. He looked up when she entered and stood, bowing formally. "Your Grace." "Lord Royce," she greeted. "What news do you bring?" He cleared his throat, smoothing a hand over the front of his doublet. "I fear some of our workers have encountered resistance along the planned road to the Stormlands. A band of outlaws has been harassing the laborers, stealing supplies. We've lost a few men already. The rest are too frightened to continue without a military escort." Sansa's brow furrowed in frustration. "Outlaws? Do they wear any sigil, or is this mere banditry?" "We're not certain," Royce admitted, "but I suspect they might be remnants of disbanded Sells-word companies. After the wars, many such men found themselves without a cause or a master." She sank into a chair, thinking. If they allowed the outlaws to disrupt construction, it would embolden others. But sending a large armed force might provoke open conflict. She needed to tread carefully. "I'll speak with the Lord Commander of the Queen's Guard as well as the Gold Cloak's captain. We'll assign a regiment to protect the workers and root out these brigands." "Will the Vale's knights contribute as well?" Lord Royce nodded. "We'll gladly send a contingent. It is, after all, our project too." Sansa gazed out the window. The horizon was hazy with heat. "Send word to your knights, then. We'll coordinate with the Crown's forces and do this quickly. The last thing we need is another reason for the realm to doubt the stability of our roads." Lord Royce inclined his head and made his exit, leaving Sansa to grapple with yet another headache. Bandits, pirates, old feuds, famine, it felt as if she were trying to plug 1,000 leaks in a massive ship. But she would not give up. Inch by inch, she would push forward. That afternoon, she received a visitor she had not expected, Samwell Tarly. The last she heard, Sam had been studying at the Citadel, continuing the work of unraveling old secrets and charting new ways for the realm to heal. He entered the Red Keep's audience chamber wearing the robes of a maester in training, though he had not yet taken his full vows as far as she knew. Behind him trailed his family, Gilly, holding their young child by the hand. The child's wide eyes stared around at the high ceilings in wonder. Sansa's face lit with genuine warmth upon seeing him. "Samwell," she greeted, descending the short steps from the dais. "It's good to see you. You've come a long way." He bowed, looking a bit flustered. "Your Grace," he said, "it's good to see you as well. I have some news I thought important enough to deliver in person." Gilly curtsied as best she could, her free arm steadying the child. Sansa beckoned them to follow her to a quieter corner of the chamber where they could talk without the formality of an audience. She gestured for a servant to bring refreshment, and soon they were seated around a small table with cups of cool water and plates of fruit. Samwell's expression was serious, even anxious. I've been studying old records at the Citadel, trying to piece together the best ways to help the realm recover, particularly in terms of agriculture, medicine, and so on. But I stumbled upon something else. There are letters from an archmaester in the past century that speak of a hidden plague that nearly swept across the continent, halted only by chance. I worry about the conditions in the city, poor sanitation, overcrowding. If something like that took root here, especially now. Sansa felt a chill. The city had always been rife with disease. She remembered hearing of plagues in other eras, how swiftly they killed. Do you have suggestions on how to prevent it? Samwell nodded. Yes, though it will require effort. We need better waste disposal, more clean water sources, and stronger quarantine measures if outbreaks begin. The Citadel can help, but we need royal authority to implement citywide reforms. Sansa rubbed her forehead. Another monumental task. But if she neglected it, the consequences could be disastrous. I'll do whatever I must to keep the people safe. Though the Master of Coin will lament the cost. Samwell offered a gentle smile. It might cost more if we ignore it. I can help provide guidance, send more learned men from the Citadel, if you'd like. I would, Sansa said firmly, and I thank you for bringing this to my attention. Gilly, who had been quietly coaxing the child to eat a piece of apple, spoke up. There are many orphan children in the city too, Your Grace. They roam the streets, hungry and sick. If we don't care for them, disease is sure to spread. Sam and I saw it ourselves just walking from the gate. Sansa's gaze flicked to Gilly, then to the child's solemn eyes. You're right. We've begun distributing bread, but that's only a start. We need orphanages, healers, safe places. I will work on this. With each new conversation, the list of tasks grew, but Sansa felt a strange resolve fill her. Perhaps that was what a good ruler did, face each new concern without turning away, even if it meant adding yet another burden to the load. Thank you both. Your knowledge is invaluable. Stay here at the Red Keep for a while, rest, and let us talk more of what we can do. Samwell and Gilly agreed, relief evident in their eyes. They had traveled far, and Sam especially seemed eager to share what he had learned. Sansa felt bolstered by their presence. Once, Sam had been nothing more than a shy boy at the wall, but he had grown into a man of insight and courage. He had played a crucial role in the defeat of the White Walkers after all. She trusted him, and trust was a rare commodity in King's Landing. As evening fell, Sansa found herself once more on the balcony, thinking about the day's revelations. The city needed not just bread but sewers and aqueducts, orphanages, patrols for outlaws. The North needed protection from pirates. The Vale and the Stormlands needed roads. Dorne awaited a reply to their envoy. The Iron Bank was still owed a debt. On and on it went. She closed her eyes, letting the evening breeze brush against her hair. Anyone else might feel crushed by such a towering avalanche of responsibilities. But she refused to buckle. She had survived worse. She would do what must be done. A guard appeared at the balcony door, clearing his throat politely. Your Grace, Ser Brienne wishes to speak with you. She's in your solar. Thank you, Sansa replied. She turned away from the city lights, heading inside. The corridor lamps flickered against the walls, casting long shadows that seemed to sway with her footsteps. When she reached her solar, she found Brienne already waiting, hands clasped behind her back in that stiff, knightly posture. Brienne, Sansa said quietly, closing the door behind her. What is it? Brienne exhaled, meeting her gaze evenly. I've done as you asked and begun training the Gold Cloaks. I've also been overseeing a few discreet investigations into potential threats against you. A faint ripple of tension passed through Sansa's stomach. Threats? You mean from lords who may challenge my rule? Brienne nodded. Not just lords. There are whispers in the streets, some men who say a woman has no right to rule, others who resent the North and think the Iron Throne belongs to a southern lineage. Most of it is talk, but I've found evidence that some are plotting to undermine your reign more directly. Perhaps an assassination attempt or stirring a popular uprising. Sansa let out a quiet breath. She had known this would happen sooner or later. King's Landing was a viper's nest. Have you identified any names or factions? Brienne hesitated. Some are linked to ex-Lannister bannermen who never accepted your rule. Others are connected to wealthy merchants who lost fortunes in the war. Right now, it's murky, but I wanted to warn you to be cautious. If you'd like, I can double your personal guard. Sansa considered it. She thought of the times she'd stood vulnerable in these halls back when Joffrey had free reign over her. She remembered how it felt to have no protector save for those whose loyalty was suspect. Now she had Brienne unwavering in her devotion. She had a queen's guard of knights she had appointed, but she was also determined not to rule by fear, barricaded behind a wall of steel. "I will accept an additional guard detail for my public appearances," she said. "But otherwise, I prefer to move freely within the keep. Let them see I'm not afraid." Brienne's eyes reflected a hint of worry, but she nodded in acceptance. "As you wish, Your Grace. But please know I will always stand at your side." Sansa reached out and gently touched the metal of Brienne's breastplate. "I know, and that knowledge is a comfort." A small moment of warmth passed between them, the bond of friendship forged through adversity. Brienne bowed her head, then left the Solar to oversee whatever preparations needed to be made. Sansa remained behind, the candlelight flickering over her features. She pressed her hand to her temple. Another threat, another worry. She would not let it consume her. She was queen, and she would meet the challenges head-on. That night, she wrote letters to the Lords of the Reach, thanking them again for their shipments and speaking of the shared goal of prosperity. She wrote to Yara Greyjoy, demanding an explanation for Ironborn raids near White Harbor. She penned a careful response to the Dornish envoy, inviting a more thorough discussion of trade agreements. She even wrote a short note to the High Septon, proposing a measured plan to reconstruct certain chapels around the city, though not the entire September, at least not yet. Each letter was sealed with her signet, each a piece of diplomacy that might shape the realm. She worked until her hand cramped and her eyes blurred. Only then did she set aside the quill, her mind still churning with details even as she tried to rest. Eventually, she rose and slipped into bed, wondering if this was the life she had once dreamed of when she was a naive girl longing to be a queen. She thought of that girl often, how innocent and misguided she had been. And yet, perhaps that girl's longing had carried a seed of truth. She had wanted to make a difference, to bring goodness to the world. The means were far more complicated than any song or story ever hinted at, but the purpose remained the same. In the deepest hours of the night, she stirred awake to the sound of distant thunder. She got up and walked to the window, looking out at a sky flickering with distant lightning. The wind carried the promise of rain. She found it oddly comforting. A storm might cleanse the city's stifling heat, wash the filth from the streets, at least for a night. She lingered there, the thin shift she wore fluttering in the breeze, her hair spilling down her shoulders. She closed her eyes, letting the freshening wind caress her face, and she found a moment's solace in it. She wondered where Jon was now, beyond the wall. She wondered if Arya was still sailing west. She wondered if Bran saw all this from wherever he was. Then she remembered her duty here and now, the unyielding present that she alone was shaped to rule. She whispered a soft prayer to the old gods, or perhaps to no one in particular, and returned to bed. Sleep claimed her in the hush of the storm's approach. When morning came, the city was wet with rainfall, the rooftops dripping silver in the dawn light. The air felt cleaner, though still tinged with the ever-present scent of humanity. Sansa rose early, refreshed by the coolness. She dressed in a simpler gown of gray and white, akin to the colors of House Stark, though not so stark as to make the southern lords think she was championing only her northern ties. She summoned a quick breakfast of hot tea and a bit of cheese and bread, then prepared for another day of governance. Word reached her that the bandits' situation on the Vale Stormlands Road had escalated overnight. A messenger from Lord Royce informed her that a patrol had been ambushed. 3 men were dead and supplies were stolen. Sansa swore under her breath, though softly. She ordered a larger force to be mustered, this time with knights from both the Vale and the Crown's men. They would ride out within 2 days, with the authority to deal with the bandits decisively. She did not like the idea of bloodshed, but neither could she allow anarchy to reign. Later, she met with Samwell Tarly again to discuss sanitation reforms. They walked the corridors of the Red Keep, and Sam explained how simple measures like building new latrines and designated refuse pits could prevent the worst outbreaks. Sansa listened attentively. She had been taught the arts of courtly manners, not the particulars of waste disposal, but she was no longer squeamish. If she had to discuss sewage to keep her people alive, she would. Together, they drafted a plan that would require laborers, engineers, and an organized system for disposing of waste outside the city walls. She assigned Sam the task of coordinating with the Master of Coin for funding and with local builders for materials. By midday, she was presiding over a small council session once more. The topics were varied. Ser Harry's fretted about the cost of everything, Lord Gendry gave updates on forging new armaments for the City Watch, and the Master of Laws mentioned new attempts by unscrupulous merchants to smuggle contraband through the city gates. Sansa handled each concern in turn, a calm eye in the center of a storm of complaints and proposals. Toward the end of the meeting, a raven arrived with the sigil of House Greyjoy. The scroll was handed directly to Sansa, who unrolled it to read Yara's reply. It was brief and curt. Yara disavowed any knowledge of the raids, claiming that if Ironborn were involved, they were renegades acting outside her command. She promised to send her own men to investigate, but reminded Sansa that she had sworn off leaving the North under an agreement with the late Daenerys Targaryen and then recognized the North's own sovereignty. Now that Sansa was queen, Yara expected the same neutrality that had been granted to her. Sansa frowned, folding the letter. She'd have to decide whether to trust Yara or press her harder. For now, she'd wait for more proof. But she instructed that the Royal Navy, still in its meager state, be prepared to sail north if needed. When the council dispersed, Sansa remained behind, staring at the intricate map carved into the table. It depicted all of Westeros, from the icy lands beyond the wall to the southernmost deserts of Dorne. Tiny carved castles and towers marked the major seats of power. She traced a finger from King's Landing up the continent to Winterfell, pausing there with a wistful sigh. Home, she thought. Would she ever see it again as it was in her memories? Likely not. Everything had changed. She had changed. A quiet cough startled her, and she looked up to see Brienne standing at the doorway. Your Grace, there is someone else here to see you, the knight said softly. He arrived unexpectedly. Sansa raised an eyebrow, curious and a bit wary. Who is it? Brienne's expression revealed a flicker of compassion. It's Ser Davos Seaworth. A wave of surprise and relief coursed through Sansa. Ser Davos, the Onion Knight, had served Stannis Baratheon, then Jon Snow, and he'd always shown himself to be a man of uncommon honesty and loyalty. She quickly nodded. Show him in. Moments later, Ser Davos entered, bowing low. Age had etched deeper lines in his face, and his hair was more white than gray now, but he carried the same air of humility and understated resolve. Sansa remembered how he had stood beside Jon, advising him with a keen sense of practicality and moral integrity. She motioned for him to rise. Ser Davos, she said, her voice warm. It's been far too long. He straightened. Your Grace. I wasn't sure you'd welcome me, but I came on my own accord, wanting to offer my counsel if you'll have it. With Jon gone beyond the wall, I found myself at loose ends. His tone was quiet, respectful. I heard you wear the crown now, and I thought you might need a hand or two. I'm no lord, but I've seen enough of the world to have a few words of advice. Sansa's lips curved into a genuine smile. I'd be grateful for any help you can give. I remember how you helped Jon. Your counsel was often wise when others were blinded by pride or anger. Davos inclined his head, looking somewhat relieved. Thank you, Your Grace. She gestured to a seat at the table. Tell me, what have you seen out there? How fares the rest of the realm? He settled down, resting his calloused hands on his thighs. Not good, if I'm honest. I came by ship from the Narrow Sea, and in every port I saw hungry faces and bandits. The lords bicker among themselves. Some still think a dragon might rise in Essos and come claim the Iron Throne. Others think the throne should have gone to, well, anyone else. But from what I hear, you've been doing right by the small folk. That's no small thing, especially here in King's Landing. Sansa nodded thoughtfully. I'm trying. It's a monumental task. I've no doubt it is, Davos said. But I'll lend you whatever help I can if you'll have me in your service. She considered it only briefly before replying. I'd be honored. You've proven your loyalty not just to Jon but to what's right. I could use such loyalty now. Davos smiled in that gentle, sad way of his, a man who had lost much but still carried a glimmer of hope. Then I'm at your service, Your Grace. They spent the next hour talking of the realm, of shipping lanes, trade tariffs, the pitfalls of dealing with the Iron Bank. Davos spoke with the practicality of a smuggler-turned-knight, pointing out ways to ease the flow of goods into King's Landing without overburdening the small folk with taxes. He also suggested ways to curb corruption in port officials, having once been well acquainted with bribes and underhanded deals. Sansa listened eagerly, grateful for his insights. By the time they parted, she felt the faint stirring of optimism. With allies like Brienne, Samwell, Davos, and the loyal lords who believed in her, perhaps she could make genuine progress. That evening, she took a lone walk along the battlements of the Red Keep. The sky had cleared after the morning's rain, revealing a tapestry of stars overhead. A mild breeze caressed her cheeks. She paused at a parapet, looking down at the city. Lanterns glimmered in the streets, and she could smell smoke from 100 hearths. It was a place still scarred by war and fear, yet alive with a kind of raw energy. She felt her heart swell with a mix of determination and empathy. Leaning against the stone, she recalled her mother's words from long ago about what it meant to be a true lady, to care for those under your protection. She recalled her father's unyielding sense of honor. She thought of the willful spirit of Arya, the quiet strength of Bran, the courage of Jon, each forging their own path. She was the sum of those influences and her own experiences. She had endured humiliation, loss, and betrayal. She had learned the art of survival from Cersei, the power of knowledge from Littlefinger, and the necessity of mercy from those who had shown it to her when she was at her lowest. All those lessons coalesced in her soul. She had once dreamed of being a queen in a story, wearing pretty gowns and hosting lavish feasts. The reality was infinitely more complex and infinitely more meaningful. She wasn't just a figurehead, she was responsible for the very heartbeat of a realm that had suffered too much. And so she would stand here night after night, year after year, if that was what it took to guide her people out of darkness. A soft footstep alerted her that she was no longer alone. She turned to see Brienne again, her white cloak catching the starlight. The tall knight inclined her head in a gentle bow. "Your Grace, the hour is late. Shall I escort you to your chambers?" Sansa smiled a little, a gesture of gratitude more than anything else. "Thank you, Brienne. Yes, perhaps that's best. Tomorrow will be another long day." They walked together, the pale stone beneath their feet reflecting the glow of the torches. Sansa let her gaze drift over the city one last time. She sent a silent prayer to the old gods, "Watch over them, all of them, and grant me the strength to do what must be done." Then she turned away, following Brienne into the keep, her footsteps measured and sure. She carried the weight of the crown as if it were a burden she had trained her whole life to lift, her heart steady with a resolve that would not break. She was Queen Sansa Stark of the Seven Kingdoms. And come what may, she would do right by her people. Days turned into weeks, and Sansa's reign took on a rhythm both demanding and oddly reassuring. Each morning, she rose before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, washed, dressed, and met with her council or various petitioners, striving to mend the cracks in a kingdom that had endured too many fractures. She learned to balance immediate relief efforts with long-term strategies, always listening to the counsel of trusted advisors like Brienne, Davos, and Samwell. Yet for all their aid, the heaviest decisions still fell to her alone. Reports from the Vale and the Stormlands confirmed that the bandits harassing the road builders had grown bolder. They moved under cover of darkness, launching sudden raids before melting back into the wilderness. Sansa authorized a combined force of Crown and Vale troops led by a seasoned knight named Ser Martin Redwine, formerly of the Reach but sworn to the Queen's service after the wars. Ser Martin had a reputation for being fair-minded, but he also knew how to track outlaws. She hoped he could bring a decisive end to the disruptions. Near the harbor, Davos took charge of reforms intended to crack down on bribery and smuggling. His familiarity with both sides of the law gave him an edge. He knew exactly which documents captains might falsify and which officials were most likely to turn a blind eye for a few gold dragons. The master of coin, Ser Harrys, grumbled about the cost of additional inspectors, but Sansa insisted that cleaning up corruption now would pay dividends later. Meanwhile, Samwell worked tirelessly on sanitation projects, pushing for new sewers and designated waste sites. He and Gilly wandered King's Landing's poorest districts, speaking with mothers who had lost children to sickness, with healers who lacked basic supplies, and with local elders who lamented the filth clogging their canals. Each finding was reported back to Sansa, who signed off on the hiring of laborers paid from the crown's growing but still precarious purse. Amidst these practical undertakings, the more subtle game of politics continued. Letters arrived from the great houses, the Tullis, who claimed to speak for the Riverlands still reeling from the war's effects, the Tyrell cousins, who had assumed partial leadership in the Reach after the main line was decimated, the Martells of Dorne, who were watchful and distant but maintained a courteous tone in their correspondence. Sansa read every word, conscious that each line could conceal a deeper motive. She composed careful replies, balancing firmness with diplomacy. She offered alliances where possible and stood her ground where necessary. The tension with the Iron Islands simmered. Yara Greyjoy had no further explanation for the raids near White Harbor, and the assaults on small villages continued sporadically. Lord Wylis Manderly sent pleas for help, insisting that if the pirates were truly Ironborn, Yara should be held accountable. Yet none of the captured raiders, when captured at all, could be interrogated properly. They often died before giving up useful information, either from their wounds or by their own hands. Sansa found it maddening. She commanded the royal shipwrights to hurry the repairs of the half-burned fleet Daenerys had once used to invade King's Landing. Davos provided guidance on building a few smaller, swift vessels that could patrol the coast, but it would be months before they were ready. The Gold Cloaks, meanwhile, slowly improved under Brienne's strict training regimen. She drilled them relentlessly, focusing on discipline and respect for the populace. Some of the worst offenders in their ranks were dismissed or imprisoned for corruption, and new recruits, men of reputable standing or at least recommended by knights Brienne trusted, took their place. Flea Bottom grew calmer under this firmer, fairer watch. Sansa continued to send bread and porridge on a regular basis, but she also set up rudimentary work programs, hiring the idle and desperate to help build new infrastructure. Wages were meager, but it was better than nothing, and it gave the people some sense of hope. Amid these efforts, the Red Keep itself underwent changes. Sansa ordered the removal of several lavish decorations that reminded her too keenly of the reigns of Joffrey and Cersei, menacing lion sigils, tapestries celebrating the Lannisters' victories. She replaced them with more neutral or historical pieces that honored all parts of the realm. She had no desire to erase the history of what had happened, but the walls did not need to glorify tyrants. The throne room, with its soaring pillars and black and white tiled floor, remained largely the same, except that she had the tall windows cleared of debris and installed new panes. Light now streamed in more freely, illuminating the Iron Throne's twisted swords in stark clarity. Sansa took no joy in sitting upon it. It was uncomfortable at best, malevolent at worst, but she did so when ceremony demanded it. She much preferred meeting people in smaller chambers or her solar, where she could speak to them at eye level. One late afternoon, she held a private audience with a group of northern envoys who had arrived, sent by several smaller houses near the neck. They bowed respectfully, and she recognized a few faces from her childhood, men who had once sworn to her father. Their main spokesman was Lord Reed's nephew, a lanky youth with solemn green eyes. He recounted how the swamps of the neck had grown strangely restless, with rumors of missing travelers and sightings of shadowy creatures that some swore were remnants of magic. Sansa, recalling tales of crannogmen and their hidden ways, assured them she would consult with Lord Howland Reed himself if possible. Beyond that, she offered to send a small contingent to investigate. The envoys seemed grateful, though they also brought mild complaints about the Crown's tax policies, saying the North was already strained. Sansa listened patiently, promising to review their grievances. She reminded herself that these men, too, were her people, no matter how far their lands lay from King's Landing. Afterward, she stepped out onto a corridor balcony to breathe. Her hair felt damp against her neck in the humid air. She rested her hands on the stone balustrade, gazing at the city below. A donkey cart rumbled by, carrying barrels of fish from the docks. A flock of pigeons fluttered between crooked rooftops. Over the past days, she had struggled with a growing sense of isolation. She had loyal advisors and the occasional visits from friends, but the demands of rule sometimes made her feel like a solitary figure in a fortress of responsibilities. She heard soft footsteps and looked over to see Samwell Tarly approaching. He bowed his head and offered a kind smile. "I was hoping to find you," he said. "I have something that might interest you." She raised an eyebrow. "Of course, Sam. What is it?" He patted a worn leather satchel he carried. "I've been reading through old records about King's Landing's earliest days, back when Aegon the Conqueror first built the Red Keep. There was a plan for an advanced network of cisterns, wells, and sewers, but it was never fully realized. Some of the original architecture might still exist underground. If we can restore it, we could drastically improve sanitation at a fraction of the cost of building anew." Sansa's eyes widened. "That's remarkable. How certain are you?" Samwell smiled sheepishly. "Reasonably certain, though the records are incomplete. We'd have to explore the tunnels beneath the city, see which sections remain passable. It might be dangerous, but if they're intact, it could save a fortune in labor and materials, and we could have proper drainage in months instead of years." Sansa gave a decisive nod. "Then we'll do it. But carefully. Brienne can spare a few guards to accompany your team. I don't want you wandering in the depths of the keep unprotected." "Understood, Your Grace," Sam replied. "I'll start assembling a crew of masons and engineers. Gilly's volunteering as well. She's quite fearless, as you know." Sansa had to smile at that. "Yes, I do know. Let me know what you find, Sam." He bowed again, and she watched him go with a sense of appreciation. Sam possessed a simple yet profound devotion to helping others, a quality Sansa wished more lords shared. She felt a flicker of excitement at the thought of resurrecting some long-buried infrastructure. If it succeeded, it could be a turning point for the city, a sign that progress was truly within reach. Before the night was out, however, a new concern arose. A raven arrived from Ser Martin Redwine, the knight she had dispatched to deal with the bandits. The letter described a fierce skirmish in the mountains. The outlaws were better organized than expected, employing guerrilla tactics and making use of hidden trails. Ser Martin had lost several men, though he managed to kill or capture a handful of the bandits. Disturbingly, among the captives' possessions, they found gold coins minted during Queen Cersei's reign, untouched and gleaming, suggesting someone had paid them recently. Ser Martin suspected a higher power was funding the raids. Sansa's jaw tightened as she read the missive. So it was not just a random group of sellswords. Someone, possibly a discontented noble, was paying these bandits to harass the crown's projects. She remembered Brienne's warnings about lurking conspiracies. There were those who could benefit from making her reign appear weak. Anger flared in her chest, tempered by a measured resolve. She would not let them tear the realm apart for their own gain. She immediately summoned Brienne, Davos, and a few others to her council chamber. She had the letter read aloud. "We need to find out who is behind this," she said, her voice tight. "Those coins are a clue. They must have come from someone with access to old Lannister stores, or a lord who hoarded them. Davos, can you reach out to your contacts in the harbor? See if any shipments of gold have been moving in an unusual manner." Davos inclined his head. "Aye, your grace. I'll do what I can." Sansa turned to Brienne. "And you, gather any intelligence you can within the keep. There may be whispers among the servants or courtiers. We're looking for someone who wants to disrupt my rule. Someone with resources to pay outlaws. Also, send a message to Ser Martin, telling him to interrogate the captives thoroughly but fairly. We need names, leads, anything." Brienne nodded crisply. "It will be done." That night, Sansa could hardly sleep. She lay awake, thinking of each act of sabotage as a step backward in her effort to stabilize the realm. She thought of the small folk who would suffer if construction halted. She remembered how easily the city had fallen into chaos under past rulers. She would not let that happen again. Eventually, she drifted into uneasy dreams of shadowy figures in mountain passes, exchanging pouches of gold for bloodshed. In her dream, the coins clinked like distant thunder, and she saw the Iron Throne hovering above a void, shaking from unseen tremors. She woke with her heart pounding. Dawn light seeped through the shutters, and she forced herself up, washing her face in a basin of cool water. Another day had come, and with it the relentless drumbeat of responsibility. She learned the results of Samwell's initial expedition into the tunnels that morning. He was grinning despite the grime on his robes, which told her he'd found something worthwhile. They met in the library, a quiet place lined with shelves of histories and records. "It's all there," Sam said, unable to contain his excitement. "Well, mostly. The corridors are partially collapsed in some places, and we need to be careful of old structural weaknesses, but the original network is more extensive than I dared hope. With enough workers, we can clear the debris and rechannel the flow of waste. It will take time, but not nearly as much as building from scratch." Sansa felt relief mingled with pride in his accomplishment. "How long until we can see real improvements in the city streets?" Sam paused, scratching his chin. "A few months to clear enough passages to divert the worst of the sewage, I'd say. We'll start seeing fewer stagnant pools, less filth in the alleys. That alone could cut disease drastically. From there, we can expand." She nodded. "Good. Proceed at once. If you need more supplies or men, talk to Ser Harry's, and if he complains about coin, send him to me." Sam grinned and bowed. "Thank you, your grace." Sansa lingered after he left, glancing around at the library's collections. She noticed an older volume about the Targaryen kings and queens, their ascension and downfalls. She remembered how Daenerys Targaryen had once seemed a beacon of hope, only to become a specter of fire and blood. The line between savior and tyrant was perilously thin. That was why every decision she made had to be weighed carefully, always mindful of the people's welfare. She would not let the lust for power or the fear of losing it twist her into a monster. Later that day, she received more news from Ser Martin Redwine. The captives, under questioning, had offered only partial truths, claiming they answered to a nameless patron who paid them in heavy pouches of gold. One of the men, half delirious from his injuries, mentioned a sigil with a crimson lion rampant. Yet that might be a deliberate misdirection. Crimson lions belonged to a lesser branch of House Lannister, or perhaps it was simply the Lannister banner recognized incorrectly. Sansa wasn't certain. But the suspicion fell heavily upon those Western lords who had once thrived under Lannister rule and now resented seeing a Stark on the throne. She decided it was time to call upon the Western lords directly. summoning them to King's Landing for a council session under the pretense of discussing trade routes and the crown's new edicts. It was as much a fact-finding mission as it was an attempt to reassert her authority. If one of them was behind the outlaws, perhaps she could corner him or her into a misstep, or at least gather more clues. She had Brienne quietly prepare additional security throughout the keep. As the day of that gathering approached, the castle grew busier. Courtiers, scribes, and stewards hurried to ready the banquet hall, to arrange accommodations for the visiting lords. Sansa insisted that the banquet be modest. No need for extravagant feasting when the city still struggled, but it must still display enough grandeur to remind everyone of the crown's dignity. Master of Coin Ser Harry's arranged for barrels of arbor wine and decent cuts of meat from the crownlands, though Sansa refused to overtax the local farmers. The cooks produced a menu that was tasteful yet not wasteful. Roast duck, spiced onions, fresh bread, and a fruit tart sweetened with honey from the local hives. Sansa approved it, all the while thinking how such a feast would look to those in Flea Bottom. At least it wouldn't be as grotesquely lavish as Joffrey's wedding had once been. On the appointed evening, the Western lords arrived. Among them were Lord Brax, Lord Kenning, Lady Crakehall, and a handful of minor nobles who had each weathered the fall of the Lannisters differently. Some had adapted, others had grown bitter. They bowed and curtsied as Sansa greeted them in the throne room. She watched their faces closely, seeking any flicker of guilt or cunning. They, in turn, regarded her with a mixture of caution and curiosity. She wondered if they still saw her as the timid girl betrothed to Joffrey, or if they grasped the steel that now lay beneath her soft exterior. The banquet took place in the Red Keep's great hall, not far from the throne room. Long tables were set up, candles casting warm light against tapestries newly hung. Sansa sat at the head, flanked by Brienne and Davos. The Western lords occupied seats of honor nearby, with lesser courtiers and knights filling out the table ends. Servants poured wine, and the aroma of freshly carved duck wafted through the air. Hollow pleasantries were exchanged, talk of the weather and the harvest. Sansa engaged each lord in conversation, listening intently for hints of discontent or hidden motives. "You've done wonders with the city," Lady Crakehall remarked, a matronly woman with silver-streaked hair. "I recall the chaos after the dragon attacks. It's much calmer now." Sansa offered a polite smile. "We have far to go, my lady, but progress is being made. The people want stability." "That they do," Lady Crakehall agreed, sipping her wine. "And hopefully they'll find it in your reign." Sansa thanked her and shifted focus to Lord Brax, a middle-aged man with hawkish features. "And you, my lord? How fare your lands since the war?" He sighed theatrically. "Still rebuilding. We lost many men in service to the Lannisters and now the mines yield less than before. But we manage. Mining can be dangerous," Sansa noted, eyes watchful. "And costly. I imagine you'd welcome any new trade opportunities." Lord Brax gave a thin smile. "Of course. We all must adapt." As the conversation continued, Sansa paid attention to those who seemed uneasy whenever she mentioned outlaws or the need to keep the king's peace. Lord Kenning grew visibly pale when the subject of banditry on major roads arose. He shifted in his seat, glancing around nervously. Lady Crakehall, on the other hand, seemed genuinely indignant at the idea of outlaws disrupting commerce. If there was a conspirator among them, they were masking their intentions well. During the second course, Davos steered the conversation toward security matters. "The Crown invests heavily in clearing bandits from the roads. We won't allow travelers to be harassed or killed. The days of lawlessness must end, wouldn't you agree?" Most of the Western lords voiced agreement, albeit with varying enthusiasm. Lord Kenning swallowed hard. Of course. Bandits are a blight. We must eradicate them." His knuckles were white around his goblet. Sansa offered him a measured gaze. "Indeed. Our men have already captured some outlaws. They confess to being paid in old gold coins minted with a lion's head. Curious, isn't it?" A charged silence fell around their section of the table. Lords Brax and Kenning exchanged a glance. Lady Crakehall's lips thinned in distaste. Someone at the far end cleared his throat. Finally, Lord Brax said, "Many of us still keep older coinage. It doesn't mean we're financing outlaws." "Certainly not," Sansa replied smoothly. "But we will investigate thoroughly to ensure no one is misusing what remains of Lannister wealth." "I trust you all understand." Nods and forced smiles followed. Brienne, standing behind Sansa, caught her eye. They both recognized the tension in the air. Sansa let the subject drop, turning to lighter topics for the remainder of the meal, but her mind churned. Lord Kenning's unease stood out. She would have Brienne discreetly keep an eye on him. If he had secrets, she intended to uncover them. When the banquet wound down, Sansa excused herself under the guise of fatigue. She walked the corridors back to her solar, Brienne and 2 guards in tow. The torches on the walls flickered, the faint smell of smoke lingering in the air. Her thoughts swirled with suspicion and strategy. She did not want to incite a civil war by accusing a lord without firm evidence. Yet if she allowed conspiracies to fester, it could tear the realm apart. Brienne spoke quietly as they climbed a short flight of stairs. "Your Grace, do you want me to detain Lord Kenning tonight?" Sansa considered it. "Not yet. We have no proof. Keep watch. If he tries to leave the city abruptly, bring him in for questioning." Brienne inclined her head. "Yes, Your Grace." They reached the solar, and Sansa dismissed the other guards, allowing only Brienne to follow her inside. The room was lit by a few candles, illuminating the table with maps and letters scattered across it. Sansa sank into a chair, exhaustion seeping into her bones. She gazed up at Brienne. "Sometimes I wonder if this is what I was meant to do, or if I'm trying to hold back a flood that can't be stopped." Brienne's expression softened. "You were meant to lead, Your Grace. I've seen what happens when others wear the crown without your sense of justice." Sansa smiled faintly. "Thank you." Her fingers drummed on the arm of the chair. "Still, we're barely containing the chaos. Every day a new crisis arises." The tall knight bowed her head in acknowledgement. "True, but you haven't faltered yet." They shared a quiet moment. Sansa sensed the current of Brienne's unwavering respect. It renewed her resolve. "Good night, Brienne. Get some rest if you can. Tomorrow may be no easier." Brienne bowed and departed. Sansa stayed seated, eyes on the table. She picked up one of the old gold coins that had been brought to her from Ser Martin's confiscated loot. She turned it in her fingers, seeing the glint of candlelight on the stamped lion's head. It was a relic of a bygone era, but its dangerous legacy still lingered. Setting the coin aside, she rose and walked to the window. Outside, King's Landing sprawled under the pale moonlight. Somewhere in that vast, tangled city, conspirators plotted, bandits struck vulnerable travelers, and hungry children still roamed the streets. Yet also, honest folk toiled daily to feed their families. Sam and his workers braved the tunnels to improve sanitation, Davos confronted corruption in the docks, and Brienne trained the Watch to be honorable protectors. 1,000 struggles, 1,000 hopes, all bound within these walls. Sansa Stark, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the night air. She was not a naive girl longing for stories anymore. She was living the reality with all its pain and triumph, all its hidden knives and shimmering possibilities. Tomorrow, she would rise again, greet the dawn, and continue the work. Because that was what queens did. And she would not falter. She was a Stark of Winterfell, and winter had taught her to endure. She lingered by the window, letting the moonlight bathe her features. A faint breeze carried the scent of salt from the Blackwater Bay. Behind her, the candles flickered on maps of roads and coasts and mines, a tapestry of challenges awaiting her decisions. The city's heartbeat pulsed below, full of peril and promise. She turned away at last, heading to her bedchamber with slow, purposeful steps. Duty and determination guided her, etched into her very soul. Come what may, she would face it with unyielding grace. Sansa slept only a few hours before the morning's first rays roused her. She dressed in a gown of muted green and ivory, then climbed to the Red Keep's highest walkway to watch the sun break over Blackwater Bay. The harbor glimmered gold and silver, ships with proud sails drifting out toward open waters. From this vantage, King's Landing almost looked serene, the grime of its streets hidden beneath the warm light. But she knew all too well the struggles simmering below. She made her way to the throne room, ready for another day's audiences. At the doors, she encountered Davos Seaworth, who carried a stack of ledgers under one arm. He bowed in greeting, though a hint of weariness haunted his features. "Your Grace," he said quietly. "There's news from the harbor. We've seized a vessel carrying more of those old Lannister coins. The captain swears he was paid to bring them in from the Westerlands. Claims he doesn't know who the buyers are, only that someone in the city is purchasing large amounts of gold from old caches." Sansa's pulse quickened. This dovetailed with the reports from Ser Martin about the bandits' coin purses. "Where's this captain now?" "In the dungeons," Davos replied. "I've asked him the usual questions, but he's a slippery one. We might need sterner methods or an offer of leniency if we want more details." Sansa's lips pressed into a thin line. She hated the thought of resorting to threats or torture. They were tools her enemies had once used against her, and she despised them. But the realm's stability was at stake. Try bargaining first. Offer him a lighter sentence if he gives us real names. If that fails, we'll consider other options. But I won't see him maimed or killed without certain cause. Remember, Ser Davos, it's easy to become what we hate if we act rashly. Davos nodded, respect in his steady gaze. I'll be cautious. I've not much taste for cruelty myself. She squeezed his arm gratefully, then proceeded into the throne room. The morning session began, a line of petitioners waiting to speak. A merchant pleaded for compensation after outlaws burned his warehouse along the Rose Road. A knight requested funds to repair a crumbling tower in the Crownlands. One older woman asked for justice against a bailiff who had beaten her son. Sansa heard them all, dividing her attention between the small matters of justice and the broader tapestry of her kingdom's well-being. It was exacting work, but she did it with as much care as she had once devoted to the finest needlework, every thread placed with purpose. When midday arrived, she broke for a brief meal in a smaller hall. She had bread, cheese, and a cup of watered wine, refusing anything more elaborate. She noted that fewer lords joined her, some had already left the city, their business concluded or their nerves frayed by the new tension. Lord Brax, Lady Crakehall, and a handful of others lingered in King's Landing, supposedly to finalize trade agreements. Sansa suspected they were also watching to see how she'd handle the threats to her rule. Lord Kenning, the most skittish of the group, had neither departed nor shown himself openly since the banquet. Word was that he feigned illness in his guest chambers. She made a note to have Brienne keep watch. After she finished eating, she retreated to her study where she found Samwell Tarly waiting with a large scroll spread across the table. Gilly stood beside him, holding their child's hand. The boy gazed around curiously at the shelves and ledgers. Your Grace, Sam said, eyes alight with that familiar eagerness. We've completed our initial survey of the underground passages. It's better than I hoped. The central sewer line is intact for nearly half a league beneath the city, though we'll need supports to prevent cave-ins. The laborers have already cleared some blockages and water's flowing again in certain channels. She stepped closer, examining the markings he'd drawn. This is excellent progress. When can we expect to see a change on the surface? Sam traced a route with his fingertip. Within a few weeks, the worst of the refuse should start draining away, especially in the lower wards. We also discovered a subterranean chamber once used for storing fresh water, a cistern that's partially collapsed. If we restore it, we can provide cleaner water for the city center. The notion of clean water brought a rare, unguarded smile to Sansa's face. That will save countless lives, Sam. Thank you. Begin the work at once. Take whatever materials and men you need. Gilly beamed. It's nice to see people in Flea Bottom starting to trust that the Crown cares. Some of them helped us clear the debris once they realized we weren't just going to toss them aside. Sansa's heart warmed at the thought. She remembered the frightened faces she'd seen on those grimy streets. I'll visit them soon to see their progress firsthand, she decided. It might lift the ire spirits, and it will help me understand what else they need. Sam bobbed his head in agreement. They'll appreciate that. Once they had finished reviewing the maps, she excused them so she could attend to the next matter, drafting letters to various houses. She wrote to Lord Wylis Manderley reaffirming her concern about the coastal raids and promising that her navy refitting was underway. She penned another message to Yara Greyjoy, politely but firmly demanding more cooperation. If she truly had no part in the raids, Sansa expected her to prove it by patrolling the northern seas. Finally, she wrote a cautious note to Lady Marjorie Tyrell's surviving cousins, who now oversaw parts of the Reach, urging them to continue sending grain at fair prices. Each letter felt like a single stone placed in a dam that struggled to hold back chaos. She sealed them with wax, pressing her signet firmly, then gave them to a steward to be sent by Raven. The afternoon drifted into late day. Servants came and went, lighting torches as dusk approached. Sansa sensed a tension rippling through the keep. No single incident caused it, but the air itself felt charged. She half expected a messenger to burst in at any moment, announcing another calamity. When at last she left her study, she found Brienne waiting outside, her expression grim. Your Grace, the knight said softly, Lord Kenning has been spotted slipping into the city streets, disguised in a hooded cloak. I thought you'd want to know. A flicker of excitement and worry stirred in Sansa's chest. He's up to something. Where's he now? Brienne gestured for Sansa to walk with her. We don't know precisely. One of our men followed him to a tavern near the Mud Gate, but Kenning vanished into the crowd. We're searching the area quietly. Sansa considered her options. She could send a detachment of gold cloaks to scour the tavern, but that might alert Kenning or any accomplices to the crown's suspicion. Or she could proceed more subtly. After a moment's thought, she faced Brienne. If we confront him publicly without proof, it could drive any co-conspirators further underground, she mused. But if he's meeting with them now, we could miss our best chance to learn who's truly behind these attacks. Brienne's jaw tightened. What do you propose? Sansa's decision crystallized. We'll go ourselves quietly. Bring a handful of trusted men and perhaps Davos. He knows the city backstreets well. I want to see if we can catch Kenning in the act or gather evidence of his dealings. Brienne looked concerned but didn't argue. She understood Sansa's resolve. Very well. But we'll keep you well guarded, Your Grace. That evening, when the Red Keep's halls began to quiet, Sansa changed into a simple cloak of dark gray wool, pulling the hood over her hair. She wore plain boots instead of her usual fine slippers. With Brienne, Davos, and 4 discreet Queen's Guard, she slipped out of a side gate, descending into the winding streets. The sun had just set, leaving the city in a gloaming of purple shadows. Torchlight flickered from shop fronts and tavern windows, revealing the bustle of King's Landing after dark. Sellers hawked roast meat on skewers, sailors unloaded cargo at the docks, and beggars huddled in doorways. The group moved carefully, blending as best they could into the crowd, though Brienne's stature was difficult to mask. Davos led the way toward the mud gate area, navigating narrow alleys. The smell of fish, sewage, and sweat clung to every corner. Sansa kept her hood pulled low, her gaze flicking from face to face. She felt the old thrill of danger, not unlike the times she had ventured beyond Winterfell's walls in younger days, though then she had never imagined being here, on this quest, as queen. Before long, they reached a weathered tavern with a hanging sign shaped like a muddy boot. Light spilled onto the street from within, accompanied by raucous laughter. Davos paused at the threshold, peering in. This is the place, he murmured. My man said Kenning came in here. Brienne and one of the Queen's Guard stepped ahead, scanning the interior for threats. Sansa followed a moment later, stepping into a hazy room thick with the scent of stale ale and pipe smoke. Rough wooden tables were crowded with patrons of all sorts, sailors on leave, sellswords, local thugs, and a few women carrying trays of drinks. In the corner, a small group of musicians plucked at strings half-heartedly. Sansa felt eyes drift over her, but no one seemed to recognize her. She glanced around, searching for a hooded figure or a known face. Brienne signaled subtly toward a side door at the back. Next to it stood a lean man with a patchy beard who watched the crowd more intently than he drank his ale. He had the look of a lookout. Davos leaned close to Sansa. He might be guarding the back room. Let me handle him. Sansa nodded. Davos approached the man with a casual air, pretending to be a slightly tipsy patron. Brienne and Sansa hung back, drifting near a wall. They watched as Davos said something in a low voice. The man scowled, gave a curt reply, and put his hand on the hilt of a dagger at his belt. Davos smiled disarmingly, then patted his pockets in a gesture suggesting a bribe. The man seemed to hesitate, then stepped aside, allowing Davos to open the door a crack and peek in. A moment later, Davos withdrew and retreated to Sansa's side, his expression tense. There's a small room back there, Your Grace, he whispered. I think Kenning is inside. He was hooded, speaking to someone with a heavy purse of gold coins on the table between them. Couldn't see the other's face well. Sansa's heart drummed. This was it. Proof, perhaps, or at least a lead. She knew it was dangerous to attempt an intrusion with so few guards. But if she summoned more men, Kenning might flee again. She stole a quick glance at Brienne, who nodded once, wordlessly acknowledging her queen's unspoken decision. They approached the door, with the Queen's Guard fanning out to clear a path. Brienne moved ahead to confront the lookout. He bristled, stepping forward, but a single warning glare from her was enough to freeze him in place. Davos slipped around him and Sansa followed, pressing through the door into a cramped corridor. At the end stood another door, behind which muffled voices rose and fell. Candlelight glowed in the gap beneath. One of the Queen's Guard, a seasoned archer named Ser Crispin, lightly tested the latch. Locked. Another guard produced a slim blade, ready to pry it open. Sansa steadied herself. If they were wrong, they risked antagonizing a potential ally or humiliating themselves. But if they were right, they might catch a conspirator red-handed. The door gave way with a creak. Inside, the sudden light from the corridor spilled onto a small table bearing a lamp, a pitcher of wine, and a leather pouch. 2 men stood abruptly at the intrusion. One was indeed Lord Kenning, his hood thrown back, revealing sweat-beaded temples and startled eyes. The other wore a black cloak drawn tight around his body, his face shadowed by a deep cowl. Sansa glimpsed a short-cropped beard and a scar across his cheek before he whipped around, reaching for a dagger. Brienne surged forward with her sword half-drawn. "Stay your hand," she barked. Lord Kenning paled, raising both hands in a placating gesture. "Wait, this isn't." Before he could finish, the cloaked man darted sideways, trying to slip past the intruders. One of the Queen's Guard blocked his path. Steel flashed, and the man slashed out with deadly speed. The guard cried out, staggering back with a wound to his arm. Brienne lunged, her sword catching the cloaked man's blade in a shower of sparks. He cursed under his breath, pivoting to escape through another door at the back of the room. Davos sprang to intercept, but the man was fast, kicking over the table and scattering coins across the floor. Sansa pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. Lord Kenning cowered behind the toppled table, arms over his head. Brienne and Davos scrambled to chase the cloaked man through the back exit, leaving Sansa with 2 Queen's Guard and a trembling Kenning in the lamplit room. A moment later, a shout echoed from outside, steel ringing on steel. She hoped Brienne would prevail. Kenning slowly lifted his face, eyes wide with dread. He recognized Sansa, and a sob of panic escaped his throat. "Your Grace, this isn't what it looks like, I swear." She glanced down. Old gold coins gleamed across the floor, some bearing the lion's head. The leather pouch had spilled, its contents rolling in lazy arcs under the furniture. Her voice came cold and steady. "Explain, then." Kenning swallowed, sweat dripping from his brow. "The man. He calls himself Khanal, though I doubt that's his real name. He approached me weeks ago, claiming he had a business proposition. I needed funds to repair my holdfast, to pay debts left from the war. He offered me gold, said it was a gift from an ally who believed the current crown was unfit. He never said who, only that they had more to share if I cooperated." Sansa's eyes narrowed. "Cooperated in what?" Kenning winced. "I was to serve as a go-between," he said. "To help funnel coin to certain sellswords in the mountains, to stir trouble on the roads so that your rule would look weak." His voice cracked. "Your Grace, I didn't realize it would lead to bloodshed. I swear, I only wanted the funds to keep my people fed after my lands were ravaged. I never intended." He broke off as Brienne re-entered the room, sword in hand. She was alone. A smear of blood stained her armor's shoulder plate, but she didn't appear hurt. She shook her head in frustration. "He escaped into an alleyway. I lost him in the crowd." Sansa's gut churned with disappointment. Her eyes flicked to Kenning. She read shame and fear in his posture, but also a flicker of desperate hope. He probably believed he could bargain for mercy. "The man you met," Sansa said, voice taut, "who paid you to fund these outlaws, did you ever see his face clearly? Did he name a higher patron? Anyone from the Westerlands or the Lannister lines?" Kenning trembled. "No, I only know he carried gold minted under Cersei. He said his allies had hidden caches, enough to bribe half the kingdom if they wished. I thought it was just an exaggeration." Brienne's gaze hardened. "And you intended to sell out the crown for coin?" Tears welled in Kenning's eyes. "My house is in ruins, my people hungry." His voice broke and he sank to his knees on the floor. "I'm a fool. A desperate fool. Please, your Grace, have mercy." Sansa stared down at him, her mind roiling. Here was living proof of how easily desperation could be twisted into treason. She recalled her father's unwavering stance against betrayers, but she also remembered how cruelty begot cruelty. Kenning was not the root of this conspiracy, merely a pawn. Yet he had cost lives, threatened her realm's stability. "Brienne, secure him," Sansa said at last. "He'll be taken to the dungeons and questioned further. I want every scrap of information he possesses on this conspiracy." Brienne nodded, hauling Kenning to his feet. He didn't resist, only whimpered his pleas for mercy. The small group of Queen's Guard returned, binding him. Sansa stooped to gather a handful of the scattered coins, her heart heavy. Another conspirator was out there, several, perhaps someone with enough gold and cunning to undermine her reign. They exited the tavern quietly. Outside, a few onlookers gawked at the group, but nobody challenged them. The guard who had been slashed clutched his bandaged arm. He was pale, but the wound wasn't fatal. Sansa led them into the winding streets under the moonlight, heading back to the Red Keep. Kenning stumbled between 2 guards, occasionally sobbing out apologies. The night air smelled of fish and rotted refuse, an unsettling reminder that while she labored to improve the city, corruption and unrest still thrived in the darkness. They slipped through a postern gate near the castle's rear, then into the dim corridors lit by guttering torches. Sansa directed them to take Kenning to the dungeons. She told Brienne to ensure he was well guarded and not mistreated, he might still yield vital information. Once Kenning was led away, Sansa found herself standing in a silent hall with Davos and Brienne. Her shoulders ached and the adrenaline in her veins left her feeling hollow. Connell, or whoever he is, will surely warn his associates that Kenning's been captured, Davos said, fatigue weighing on his voice. They'll likely lie low. Sansa nodded wearily. We have enough to confirm that these raids are orchestrated by more than random outlaws. But who's truly behind it? A lord from the Westerlands? Some ex-Lannister ally with hidden wealth? Or someone else entirely seeking chaos? Brienne bowed her head. We'll find out, Your Grace. Kenning's testimony could guide us. Sansa could only hope so. She dismissed them with quiet thanks, then stepped toward her private chambers. Thoughts churned relentlessly. Was she any closer to uprooting the threat than before? If anything, she now saw how deep it might run, like a canker gnawing at the kingdom's foundations. She passed a guard who bowed deeply, but she barely acknowledged him. The weight of the crown pressed on her anew, sharper and colder than a blade at her throat. Reaching her solar, she slipped inside, exhaling a long, shaky breath. Candle flames danced on the walls, illuminating documents piled on her desk, each a reminder of her responsibilities. She wanted nothing more than to collapse onto her bed, but she forced herself to pace, to think. Her father's voice seemed to echo through time, speaking of honor and justice. She thought of her mother, who had fought fiercely for her children, never yielding to despair. At last, she sank into a chair, resting her forehead in her hands. She would not let conspirators snatch away all she had built. She would quell this rebellion, protect her people, and forge the peaceful realm she had promised. Closing her eyes, she inhaled slowly, centering herself. Tomorrow, she would oversee Kenning's interrogation. She would continue building alliances with the houses that stood with her. She would press on with the city's reforms, ensure bread for the hungry, water for the sick, and justice for the oppressed. The conspirators might lurk in the shadows, but she would not shrink from the light. She was Sansa Stark of Winterfell, the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. For every blow they struck, she would respond with calm resolve and an unwavering commitment to what was right. After a time, she rose and made her way to her bedchamber. Even as she undressed, the events of the night reeled through her mind. Kenning's terrified eyes, the blade catching the lantern's glow, the spilled coins rolling across the floor. She thought of how easily she could have met the same fate as so many before her, dying at the hands of traitors in a dark corridor. But she lived. And as long as she lived, she would fight to protect the realm from those who wished to tear it apart. Outside, the moon hung low in the sky, a silver crescent. She pulled a heavy blanket over her, hoping for at least a few hours of restorative sleep before dawn's demands beckoned again. She thought briefly of Arya, of Jon, scattered to the winds, each facing their own path. Then her eyes closed and dreams claimed her in tenuous waves. In the hush of her slumber, she heard the echo of wolves howling in a far northern night, reminding her that no matter how distant Winterfell seemed, her identity as a Stark endured, stronger than steel, keener than any conspirator's blade. When morning arrived, Sansa awoke bleary but resolute. She dressed quickly in a warm gray gown and stepped into her solar, where a fresh flurry of letters and messages awaited. One raven came from White Harbor, detailing another raid on a fishing hamlet. Another from Ser Martin reported minor progress against the bandits, but no major breakthroughs. Sansa skimmed them with a heavy heart before she turned her attention to Kenning's interrogation. Down in the Red Keep's dungeons, the air was cold and damp. Torches sputtered against the mossy stone walls. She found Kenning chained to a bench, looking pale and haggard. A maester stood by, ready to tend any wounds. Sansa insisted on no needless cruelty. Brienne and Davos flanked her. The prisoner raised his head at their approach, eyes brimming with desperation. "Your Grace," he rasped. I'll tell you anything I know. Only, please, I beg for mercy." Sansa regarded him with measured composure. She needed to balance her duty to punish treason with the possibility that Kenning could be redeemed or at least used as a witness. "Speak truthfully, and we shall see what mercy is warranted." Kenning swallowed hard, glancing at Davos and then Brienne. Connell claimed he answered to a power that would restore the rightful order in the realm, a power that believed a Stark queen was an abomination, unnatural. He said once the roads grew too dangerous and the crown's authority collapsed, a champion with a better claim would emerge. Sansa fought a shiver. She remembered all too well how some in Westeros still clung to the notion that a woman couldn't rule. A better claim? He never gave a name. No, Kenning replied miserably. He hinted it was someone with ties to the old Lannister seat, but that might have been a ruse. "I swear, I don't know." She studied him a moment longer. What else did he mention? Plans, associates, safe houses? Kenning licked his dry lips. He spoke of shipments arriving by sea, more gold, and occasionally weapons. He has contacts in the harbor. Said they've bribed officials so the cargo isn't inspected. They pay men to raid caravans, stir fear. He wanted me to pose as a victim if suspicion fell too close to claim innocence. But you caught me before I could. Sansa turned to Davos. This matches what we found on that seized vessel. We need to tighten watch on the docks. Root out the bribed officials. She faced Kenning again. You realize the lives you've endangered? Innocent men, women, children. You've spilled blood on your hands for gold. That is treason. He nodded miserably. I know. I'll accept whatever punishment you decree, only please spare my house. My people had no part in this. Sansa's heart weighed with conflicted emotion. She thought of how many times she'd seen entire families destroyed because of one lord's foolishness. The North remembered, as did she. Still, Kenning had actively facilitated these outrages. Could she in good conscience show him undue leniency? He was guilty. Yet punishing him too harshly might deter other wavering lords from coming forward if they, too, had been entangled in conspiracies born of desperation. At length she spoke. You will remain in the dungeons for now. I will deliberate on your fate. With a final grim look, she departed, her retinue following. The echo of the iron door clanged behind them. Emerging into the daylight of the castle yard, she inhaled the fresh air. Already her mind churned with the next moves. She would direct Davos to clamp down on the harbor, Brienne to dispatch the gold cloaks in strategic sweeps, and Samwell to keep the city's improvements marching forward. She would draft letters to the major western lords, subtly warning them that she was aware of hidden caches of gold. And all the while, she would keep an eye on the next sign of betrayal. As she crossed the courtyard, she noticed a small commotion near the gates. Another party of travelers arrived, flying the banners of the Vale. Lord Royce had returned, accompanied by a handful of knights. They looked travel-worn but resolute. She went to greet them, suspecting the outlaws in the mountains had drawn them back to request more aid. Indeed, when she met Lord Royce by the gates, he recounted further skirmishes. The Vale's men had managed to kill or drive away several pockets of bandits, but the enemy seemed funded and well-armed, exactly like those Ser Martin described. Sansa steeled herself, repeating the by-now familiar vow: this conspiracy would be laid bare, one piece at a time. She invited Lord Royce inside to discuss strategies. While some queens might posture or demand fealty, she took the approach of cooperation, laying out maps, comparing intelligence, planning pincer movements to corner the outlaws. Beneath her fatigue, she felt a quiet determination. This was what she had promised: to serve the realm, to protect it from cruelty. Later that evening, after hours of planning, she dismissed her council. Walking alone through a dim corridor, she felt the day's weight pressing on her. She passed a window slit, pausing to glance at the city below. Lanterns flickered along the main thoroughfares, and a half-moon shone overhead. So much work done, so much yet to do. But she could see flickers of hope, too: the alley near Flea Bottom that no longer reeked of rotting waste, the lines of townspeople receiving bread in an orderly fashion. Progress. Fragile but real. She continued on to her private quarters. Inside, she found a message left on her desk, a simple note bearing the sigil of House Tyrell. One of the cousins who now led the region asked if Sansa would consider a progress tour of the Reach to reassure the local lords that stability was returning. It would mean leaving King's Landing for a time, which might be risky while conspirators still schemed. Yet forging direct bonds with the Reach was crucial. She'd have to think carefully on it, weigh the dangers of leaving the capital against the potential benefit of securing the southern breadbasket's loyalty. Setting the note aside, she let out a long breath. Night wrapped the castle in hush once more. Sansa changed into a soft linen robe and settled by the hearth where a small fire crackled. She mulled over everything: Kenning's confession, the unknown conspirator, the bandits in the mountains, the ships at the harbor, the raiders in the north. Each threat loomed large. But she had begun unraveling the knots, pressing forward inch by inch. The city's morale was slowly lifting. Lords who once doubted her were starting to see glimpses of her resolve. The realm was not yet healed, but perhaps in time it could be. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the fire on her cheeks. She remembered a winter night long ago, sitting in Winterfell's great hall with her mother, listening to old Nan's tales. Back then, Queen had sounded like a fairy tale word belonging to glittering southern courts. Now she was that queen, but her life was no fairy tale. It was real and often brutal, requiring constant vigilance and sacrifice. Yet she found purpose in it, a sense of duty that lit her path as surely as any beacon. Rising at last, she walked to the window. The moon bathed the city in silver. A faint breeze ruffled her hair. She wondered if the conspirator behind these raids was gazing at that same moon somewhere, plotting new ways to undermine her. She wondered if Jon was looking at the sky beyond the wall, or if Arya sailed beneath foreign constellations. The world was vast and each of them walked different roads. Her road was here, on these well-worn stones, in the heart of a capital that had known too much darkness. She laid a hand on the cool stone sill, letting the night air wash over her. Tomorrow she would wake and fight again, for the sake of the city's children, for the memory of her father, for the dream of a realm that did not devour itself in greed and vengeance. She would keep hope alive, not as a naive girl, but as a woman who had seen the worst of men and still chosen to stand for what was good. That was how she would forge her legacy, not through fear or cruelty, but through the unyielding perseverance of a Stark who had lived through nightmares and refused to let them define her. She remained there for a long moment, gazing at the moonlit sprawl of King's Landing. Quiet footsteps echoed in the corridor behind her, Brienne likely standing guard even now. Sansa felt gratitude for such loyal companions. Let conspirators skulk and bandits raid, let them whisper of dethroning her. She was no helpless pawn. She was a queen with a heart tempered by winter's trials and a will hardened by countless betrayals. As the embers in the hearth died down, she turned from the window and prepared to rest, knowing the battle continued at dawn. In that hush, she remembered who she was, Sansa Stark, daughter of Ned and Catelyn, a wolf of the North crowned in the South. She had learned the cruelties of power from the Lannisters, the cunning of politics from Littlefinger, and the strength of survival from the harshest nights of winter. Now those lessons guided her hand as she worked to guide an entire realm out of the shadows. She allowed herself a final, steadying breath, then slipped into her bed, determined to greet the next day with the same fierce resolve. Sleep swept over her, carrying her into dreams of stark winter forests and the calls of distant direwolves. She dreamt of a path winding through dark woods, lit by faint moonlight, leading toward a golden dawn. Though branches scratched her arms and shadows flickered, she pressed on, unafraid. She was queen, and she was not alone. Brienne guarded her door, Davos championed her cause, Sam labored to heal the city, and thousands of lives depended on her success. In the dream, she carried a lantern that never dimmed. And so she walked forward, step by step, into the uncertain future with unwavering grace.